Hi everyone, I'm attorney Aiden Durham with 180 Law Co. in Colorado, and you're watching All Up in Your Business. On this episode of All Up in Your Business, we're going to talk about the differences between a sole proprietorship and an LLC. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and check the description for links to additional information and resources. All right, so deciding whether or not to operate a business as an entity like an LLC can be a pretty big and important decision to make. Well, plenty of people operate their businesses as a sole proprietorship. Operating as something like an LLC or a corporation can provide pretty significant benefits in a lot of situations. So let's start with formation. How do you start a sole proprietorship versus how do you start an LLC? You don't really form a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is just one person doing business. You just start doing business and boom, you're a sole proprietorship. And the equivalent to sole proprietorship, if there's more than one person, is called a general partnership. So the same ideas that apply to a sole proprietorship also apply to a general partnership, except there's two or more people in a general partnership. There aren't many, if any, states that have any real legal requirements for operating as a sole proprietorship. In most states, though, if you're going to do business under a name that's different from your legal personal name, then you'll need to file a DBA or a trade name or a fictitious name, assumed name with your Secretary of State to record that you're doing business under that DBA or trade name. But aside from that, there's really not a whole lot that goes into it. Very few states have actual requirements about how you can go about operating a business as a sole proprietorship. Now, of course, that's not to say that there are no rules or regulations that go into a sole proprietorship. You still have to follow all the laws like you would in any other business. If you're going to be making taxable sales, for instance, you'll still need a sales tax permit, sales tax license in most jurisdictions, just like you would with any other kind of business form. You may still need a business license or permit in your jurisdiction, depending on what those requirements are. And if you're in a profession that requires some kind of a license, then you'll still need to abide by those licensing terms, regardless of if you're operating as a sole proprietorship or an LLC. For example, if you're a licensed cosmetologist, the same requirements for being a licensed cosmetologist will apply as a sole proprietorship. An LLC, on the other hand, is a legally recognized business entity or form of business entity, and we do form an LLC. In most states, we do this by filing articles of organization with the Secretary of State. The term is going to depend a little bit, might differ from state to state. Sometimes it's called a certificate of formation or something like that. But articles of organization is the most common term used for the paperwork that's filed to form an LLC. Some states might have additional requirements for how you start an LLC. Again, this is going to differ from state to state, but most states are pretty permissible when it comes to not requiring a whole lot. You form the LLC and then you can do some other things. For example, you might want to draft an operating agreement. Some states actually require the operating agreement, but some states don't. Some states might require that you hold an organizational meeting of the members or the managers of the LLC. Again, most states, though, might permit you to do this, but they won't require it. In most states, LLCs are going to have some kind of annual or periodic filing requirement. In Colorado, for example, we have to file a periodic report every year and pay a small filing fee. Some other states have annual franchise tax fees or other filing requirements that you have to abide by. Most of the time, these things aren't going to apply to sole proprietorships, except that you may need to renew your DBA or trade name registration on an annual or other periodic basis, again, depending on your state. How about taxes? I hear a lot of people talking about, well, I want to form this LLC so I can save on taxes. Unfortunately, that's not really how that works. For federal tax purposes, a single member LLC is taxed as a sole proprietorship. It's considered a disregarded entity. The IRS disregards it and treats it as if you are operating as a sole proprietorship. So for federal tax purposes, there's really no difference at all between a sole proprietorship and a single member LLC. You'll be paying the exact same in taxes either way. In both instances, you will report your profits and losses on Schedule C to your 1040 or whatever 1040 form you use to report your taxes. And then you pay income tax and self-employment tax on the profits, regardless of if you're a sole proprietorship or operating as an LLC. So again, no real significant tax difference between a sole proprietorship and an LLC, except there is one little benefit that you might be able to get from an LLC. If you're operating as an LLC, then you can elect for your LLC to be taxed as an S corporation. And making this S corp election can, in a lot of circumstances, significantly reduce your overall tax bill. That's not an option if you're operating as a sole proprietorship. So when it comes to taxes, the one minor benefit you might get from operating as a LLC instead of a sole proprietorship is that ability to make that S corp tax election. Now, of course, the biggest difference, because up until this point, I don't know about you guys, it sounds like LLC and sole proprietorship are pretty similar, except that an LLC has some additional filing requirements. What's the biggest difference between an LLC and a sole proprietorship? Of course, is limited liability. That's what that LL and LLC means, limited liability company. And what that means is your liability as an owner is limited. Whereas in a sole proprietorship, if there's any legal issues, any debts, obligations with the sole proprietorship, those are your legal issues. Those are your debts, your obligations as a person. Anything that happens with the business happens to you because it's you. You are the business. With an LLC though, it's a separate, legally recognized entity. And so liabilities, debts, obligations, those are with the LLC and not with you as the individual member, unless of course you agree to be responsible or liable for debts, obligations, or otherwise. And so operating as an LLC can significantly protect your assets, your money, your home, your car, your investments, all these things. The idea is that they'll be protected from any liability, legal issues, debts that might come up against the business, because it's against the business, not against you. Aside from that though, aside from that significant liability protection difference between a sole proprietorship and an LLC, a sole proprietorship and a single member LLC operate almost identically. Of course, formation, like I said, is a little different. You have to file articles of organization with the Secretary of State to start an LLC, whereas you might just need to file a DBA or a trade name for a sole proprietorship. Taxes are exactly the same. You'd pay the exact same in taxes as a sole proprietorship as you would a single member LLC. You report your taxes the same. You have the ability to take the same kinds of business deductions. Everything's the same, except that an LLC can make an S corp tax election. You can do the same kinds of business. There's no requirement that I know of, at least, that any certain type of business has to operate as an LLC or has to operate as a sole proprietorship. You can engage in the same business operations and conduct the same kind of business that you would in either circumstance. You're going to have a few more filing requirements for an LLC. You might have to get an operating agreement drawn up. You might have to have annual meetings. You're most likely going to have to make some kind of annual or periodic filing with your state. And of course, there are a lot of other things that are good to do in a single member LLC to uphold that limited liability protection. But aside from all that, the real biggest difference between a sole proprietorship and an LLC is that limited liability protection that the LLC gives you. That's all for this episode, folks. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. And again, don't forget to check the description for links to additional information and resources. I've got a handy online tool that you can access down. The link is in the description. This tool allows you to form an LLC online in any state, super easy. I've also got a free download for my new business checklist. Both of those are in the description, as well as my other videos about avoiding the risks of the single member LLC if you decide to go that route. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Aiden Durham, and I'll see you next time.